Ruler School is brought to you by Happy Little Hug Factory and these amazing patrons. Extra special thank you to guest lecturer patrons Brody Harris and Lance Albertson. Thank you for your support. Enjoy the video. Hey there everybody, DMO73 here, bringing you the deck profile for the Chamimi Zoo list that was piloted by Tyler earlier this week. This is Stephen Hulshizer's list from Minneapolis, from the WGPQ at Games and Geek, but we thought we'd kind of go into it a little bit better breakdown for you, and we wanted to show you a little bit better about how it actually works. So Chamimi Zoo is very, it's more of an aggro into mid-range kind of deck. The sideboard gives it some options to kind of transition a little bit more to control, but we're not going to talk about the sideboard because that is kind of meta dependent, and there were some cards in there that Steven himself thought that he would just cut in post. So Chamimi, obviously, on her front side is our usual 10 Divinity, Judgments for 5, Energized Green. On her alt face, though, she's a 10/10 with Divinity 10, and just Resonators you control gain +4/+4. And when the fact that she's a deck that likes to go wide, if you can have an opening where you have suddenly this everything is a +4/+4, a lot of her creatures become 10/10s, and you can just close out the game very, very quickly. To move into the runes, this plays this combination of Sandstorm and Rapid Fire Me. This is essentially a 3 Divinity combination that says for 1 will, deal 6 damage to your opponent's board, specifically Resonators, and that can actually be really helpful in clearing to get through damage. You're going to notice a lot of the things that this deck likes to do is to try to find ways to get damage through. So you have this combination is really helpful. Yokai Festival is also something that they can cost for just essentially 3 will, which will give them 2 of the 100 Eyes one, which we'll talk about in a bit. And so that'll allow them to kind of prevent 2 things from being able to block. So it's another way to, again, push through damage. Moving into the other 2 runes, there's Forest Meditation, which is the pretty powerful thing to be able to reload your hand for green. So you use the 2 Spirit Stones. So you'll pay 2 green, sack the 2 Spirit Stones to draw 2 cards, then cast Forest Meditation, bring those 2 Spirit Stones back into play recovered, and then you get to either draw a card or return a Resonator that was in your graveyard back to your hand. So it's a big utility reload card that actually has a lot of power, and is a very good kind of end of game kind of card for this deck to be using. And then lastly, Elephant Rush, which is just here's 3 10/10 Resonators for 5 will. It can't be chased, can't be canceled. So it is very powerful based on the matchup. There are certain decks that just can't deal with suddenly that much pressure for 3, especially if the following turn you follow it up with a Judgment to go make them all 14/14s. But it is important to note that Elephant tokens do have a total cost of 0. So something like Black Tears, which is pretty common right now, is actually going to destroy them. So that's a little bit of matchup dependent. If your opponent's running black, this card doesn't get used necessarily as much, especially post sideboard, and you kind of rely on the other 4 to help you get your damage through. So going into the stones real quick, 4 Spirit Stones, obviously it's the reload card, it's an excellent wind stone, even is treated like a magic wind stone. 4 Speaking Stones, because you want some protection from Time Spinning Witch, specifically Mosasaurus, and this card has barrier, so Mosasaurus can't touch it. And then 2 Wind Magic Stones just lets you, and you just follow it out, because the whole deck is green, primarily outside of Ruin Stories, which just splashes the black. So going into the main deck, it's pretty straightforward. 4 Lorites, it's pretty standard right now in this format. Very, very strong card. 4 Fairy of the Last Isle for some flying early damage, as well as being able to, if your opponent spends time to try to kill it, you've got some floating will. You can banish it in response, negate it, it was going to get killed anyway, and you get to draw a card. 4 Pygmy Hippo. Very early game aggression. It's a beast, as well as CL is also a beast, so that's why we use CL's Familiar to kind of help make it so that we can get those Pygmy Hippos out early. CL for some spot splash damage, for being able to kind of pop Resonators that are in your way to sneak through that damage, as well as keep your hand flooded. Viola, because it's awesome for being able to deal with the graveyard of certain decks, as well as make your stuff be bigger and have flying to, again, sneak in that damage. 100 Eyes 1, when it enters the field, your opponent can't, one of their Resonators can't block, which is, again, that way to sneak through damage, and is one of the reasons why Yokai Festival is so powerful. 4 Lorite 7 Disciples, heavy hitter of the format right now. Super strong card, especially in combination with Lorite, but even without it, it is potentially one of the best cards right now, I think, in the format. So getting to run 4 of it is pretty standard for this deck. it really is a major way this deck likes to close out games, is just by sticking 900 flying Glorite 7 Disciples and just hit you over and over again. 2 Magic Boomerangs for some utility, helps recycle the deck's Lorites, as well as being able to give things flying and ping stuff for damage to follow up on like the Snipe Away the Rapid Fire Me combinations. Elemental Blast again, because you can cantrip really nicely to deal the Torrent, to deal 700 damage to something just for 1 will. And it's also a Spirit Magic, which is the other reason why it's played with the 4 Winds of Vitality, which is for pumping for that extra damage, kind of cheat out win trades, stuff like that. But it's also a Spirit Magic, so now you have 2 different Spirit Magics totaling 6 total, so you can recycle Lorite twice. 4 Fair Spell for the cancel to keep yourself protected, and then 3 Ruin Stories. This deck actually makes use of all 3 modes that we can actually still use pretty effectively, banishing a Resonator, canceling, and recursion from the graveyard. So all in all, this deck is definitely an aggressive to mid-range deck that has a lot of utility and a lot of like ways to cheat through damage and combat tricks. So if that's something you're into, I definitely recommend playing it. It is a ton of fun to play, and you get to use a lot of good combinations of new and old cards, which I think is excellent. So, but that's it for the deck. Let me know what you guys would change about the list, or if you would try to pilot more of a controlled Chamimi list. We'll try to put up a controlled Chamimi version sometime in the next coming months, so be on the lookout for that as we move forward. But until next time, guys, this is DMO73 signing off.